Right, hello, welcome back for another one. Very good, cool, hope everybody's doing okay. Everybody's been doing great on all the material that we've been learning so far, and we're rocking and rolling through this thing. We're already ready for US.08 to US.11, so we're knocking out the standards, man, and this year is flying by already. Before you know it, it's gonna be fall break. Wow, cool. All right, so the next topic that we're gonna talk about is the progressive era, okay? And the base word of this word, progressive, is progress. So what are we progressing, huh? What's progressing here? What we're doing, what we're talking about is things in America have been going well economically, but socially things have been not so good. Remember in the South, you got a lot of racism, racial injustice, Jim Crow laws, a lot of discrimination, a lot of bad things going on in the South. And remember, Southern farmers were struggling with poverty. So things are struggling in the South. Remember in the North, you got a lot of overcrowded cities, immigrants working and they're living in very overcrowded apartments, a lot of poverty, and a lot of just really bad working conditions. And we talked about Jane Addams and Jacob Riis a little bit and how they started to help the poor. But this is the time period where we're going to get a lot of people fighting for more rights and a lot of people fighting to improve the lives of different groups of people. So African Americans in the South, we're going to talk about Washington and Dubois. And as far as the poor people in the North, we'll talk about social Darwinism and the social gospel. We've been talking a whole lot about farmers and the railroad already, and we're going to get to way more of that here at US 10, the Granger Movement. That's just a fancy word for farmers who don't like the railroad power. And then in US 11, that's when we're going to get to really the poor people who are working in factories who need better conditions, okay? So remember, email me if you need to. Y'all are doing a great job emailing me. I appreciate all the questions. It doesn't bother me at all. So if you have any questions, please email me. Remember to take breaks and pause this video. This one might get a little bit long, but hopefully we can go quickly through it. Everything's pretty straightforward, so let's just rock and roll. First one we got to do, US.08. There are two new words that you're going to have to know. Social Darwinism and the social gospel, okay? And let me take a look at this, just make sure it's looking good so far. Oh yeah, we can see it perfectly. Good. I like to double check. I want really good quality videos for y'all. All right, so let's jump right in. Social Darwinism and the social gospel. They're polar opposites, so that's what you need to know. Social Darwinism is bad. That's where we're going to start. This is a bad thing in history. So, social Darwinism, bad. Ew. So when you see this word, I want you to always remember social Darwinism is bad. Okay, so here's what it's based on. Darwin, remember Charles Darwin? You probably learned about him in middle school, probably a science class. He believes that, remember, things evolve and change over time. And one of the big theories of Darwin is survival of the fittest. Survival of the fittest. So what does that mean? That means whatever's the strongest, whatever's the best, they're going to be at the top, and everybody else gets left behind. Now, that's Darwinism. That's the theory of evolution. Let's add in this word, social. Social means like how society works, everyday life. And we already talked about in the United States, there's a wealth gap, right? You got really rich people up at the top, then everybody else at the bottom. And remember, factory workers and immigrants, they're the biggest group at the bottom, and they're very poor, right? And under the idea of social Darwinism, it's a belief that it's supposed to be that way. So that's why it's bad. It keeps the richest at the top, it keeps the poorest at the bottom. So let's go through a couple more slides and I'll explain it a little bit better. So basically this is really bad, keeps rich people at the top because they think they're fantastic and they think they're rich and they're better than everybody else, and it keeps poor people down below. And this is a very, very bad idea for society, okay? Society needs to be able to shift. All right, now, the idea behind it is that poor people were supposed to be poor under this idea. The rich people at the top believed that poor people were just supposed to be poor. That was their destiny in life. Sorry, hate it for you. And the rich people believed, check this out, the rich people believed that they were supposed to be rich because they had good qualities. There's something fantastic about me, and that's why I'm rich. Sorry, it's just the way it is. So this is how it's broken down. You got the rich at the top. They're sitting, enjoying, having a wonderful, lovely life. So those are your industrial capitalists. Remember Carnegie, Rockefeller, JP Morgan, all those guys, okay? So they're the ones at the top, and then the rest are down below, okay? Now Carnegie was actually a good guy, but he is one of these industrial capitalists, but that's neither here nor there right now. So everybody gets left behind down here, but under this theory, it's not any fault of this guy. Even though he's got tons of money, it's not his fault that everybody else gets left behind. He could help him out, but it's because he's such a wonderful person that he gets to be at the top, okay? Okay, hope that makes sense. We're gonna keep going through, I'll tell you a little bit more. Social Darwinism, bad. All right, so we've seen this before. So social Darwinists believe that this is how the system is supposed to be. They believe it's supposed to be like this, where the poor serve the rich and they rule with a powerful sword. You know, they're the rich, they're better than you, and it's not their fault that you're poor, it's your fault that you're poor. That's what social Darwinists believe. This is really, really bad for society because this group, who is basically serving this group, always gets left behind. Okay, they always get left behind. And remember, when they're left behind, that opens the door to a lot of corruption to guys like Boss Tweed, who were willing to help out these people, but in their own sketchy kind of way. Okay? Let's keep going, and I'll tell you a little bit more about social Darwinism. There's a lot on this topic, but just know it's bad, keeps rich people up here, keeps poor people down here, and it's just an ugly way to think. Okay? Now, here's the really, really bad part. Okay? Social Darwinism eventually leads to these people. Ooh, this is bad, okay? So social Darwinism leads to racism, right? Because in American society, remember in the South, the society was being divided because of race. And because of that divide, African Americans under separate but equal, remember it wasn't equal, they were getting left behind, okay? Poverty was much more common among African Americans. And because of that, this social Darwinism, which brings in that money aspect, they say, hey, you're poor because you're supposed to be poor. You're left behind because you're supposed to be left behind. Woo, can't talk. And so the rich, they're on top. Everybody else gets left behind. And they don't care. They look down on everybody. And so this is really, really bad. And it turns into racism, and it turns eventually into the Nazis. They believed in the process of social Darwinism. They believed that they were the best. They were better than everyone else. And that's why they targeted the Jews and gypsies and people who had mental handicaps and things like that. They went after all these groups who weren't as wonderful as they were, okay? So social Darwinism is really bad, okay? This is a bad thing in society. I want you to remember it. This is very important because it's going to pop up multiple times in this class, okay? Social Darwinism is bad. It's where the rich think they're better than everyone else, and it's supposed to be that way, okay? I know that was a lot already, but we're going to keep going, and now we're going to flip to something good, okay? Remember to pause if you need to, okay? And email me with any questions. All right, let's flip to the opposite side. We get the social gospel, which is a good thing. Social gospel is good, so we need to write that. So make sure you know that. So social Darwinism was bad. Social Darwinism is good with a smiley face. You can remember G, good, okay? All right, so the social gospel, the gospel is a reference to the Bible. If you remember, gospel means it's like the good news of Jesus, okay? But for our purposes, the social gospel means that there were good people in America who had the ability to fix America's problems. So they believed that if they applied Christian values or being a good person, you could apply those things and help out poor people. You could apply those things and help out African Americans who were suffering under discrimination and racism. And you could help out those who were considered to be unequal, okay? But the way you had to do it was by targeting these things. You have to target alcohol, and this is going to lead to a big thing in American history, Prohibition, okay? And they helped out people living in slums. So if you remember Jane Addams, the Hull House, she's going to be a big member of this group, the social gospel, okay? So social gospel is good. It means using good values, good behavior to help out and fix these problems in America, okay? So let's keep going and learn a little bit more. Also, let's take a look at this real quick. We're going to learn We're going to learn who this guy is. He is Booker T. Washington. Here he is sitting down with Teddy Roosevelt. Look, there's Abraham Lincoln in the background, and we have this word, equality. So that's kind of what we're headed towards. Progressive era, progress, social gospel, good, okay? And we're headed towards equality. That's the goal. But remember, the social Darwinists, they don't want that. But that's kind of the conflict in this part of history that we're talking about. We're getting a little more complex with these topics, so hopefully you're sticking with me. Email me if you need help, okay? All right. So here's how they went about it. They had a few different ways. Remember Hull House, Jane Addams' settlement house? There were settlement houses all over America in the big cities. Jane Addams just happens to be the most famous, okay? But here's how they did it. So if you say you needed to visit a doctor and you couldn't, a lot of these doctors who participated in this, they're good people. They would provide cheap medical help. So maybe if you have a cold or sickness and you don't have any money, you're an immigrant and you're fresh in America and your child is sick or whatever, you could go to one of these settlement houses and you could get help, you could get medical help. Also remember, a big push for immigrants was to learn English. Okay, we talked about this already. They were expected to learn English so they could go to these settlement houses and learn English. By the way, I need to make sure you remember settlement house, such as Hull House. That's the famous one. That's going to pop up a lot, so remember this. Settlement house, Hull House, Jane Addams, most famous example. But these are houses where immigrants can go and they can learn English. Remember, they can get medical help, just like I said. Remember Jane Addams, she might give them money to ride the train. She might get them in connection with somebody to get a job. And look at this. This is a huge thing. They're going to start focusing on workers' rights. If you remember, I showed you the picture of the little kids working in the factory. That's going to be something they start heading towards. We got to get better rights for workers. They need to be paid more. Life will get better if they have a little bit more money, okay? So social gospel is good. They're helping out poor people, they're helping out immigrants, and they're applying good values to help out these people. If you remember, social Darwinism is very bad. They believe the rich are rich and the poor are poor, and that's life. Tough, deal with it, right? Right, okay. I think that's it on the social gospel. Oh, one more. Eventually this leads to other things, which is very, very good too. Eventually we're going to get to women's suffrage, which is the women's right to vote, and then later the civil rights movement. So social gospel is very, very good in America, okay? Social gospel good, social Darwinism bad, okay? Trying to make it simple. All right. So, number one, how did social Darwinism increase the wealth gap between America's rich and poor? How did America's rich feel about being rich? They believed it was their right, correct? And what did they feel about the poor? Sorry, you're poor, okay? So how can we say this? Under social Darwinism, the rich had no desire to help the poor, okay? So, under social Darwinism, the rich, we'll say the rich believed there was no need to help the poor. Remember, they believed that this is the way it's supposed to be. I'm rich because I'm awesome. Sorry you're not awesome, and sorry you're poor. Tough. This is really bad. There's no reason to be thinking like that, okay? So under social Darwinism, the rich believed they had no reason to help the poor. You're poor because there's something wrong with you, basically, is what they're saying. What negative effects did social Darwinism encourage? Well, it leads to racism, or we can say it led to racism. Led to wealth inequality, because remember, the rich believe that they were rich and they're not going to help out anybody else. I'm going to keep making money, and I'm not going to help you make any more money. I'm not going to help out those below me. And this is we're talking about that top 1% of rich people, those industrial capitalists that were the rich factory owners. They believe, hey, I'm here because I'm supposed to be. They're there because they're supposed to be. Sorry, that's life. Led to racism, wealth inequality, so the wealth gap, and eventually Nazism. We're going to learn about Nazism in this class. We'll get there. The after Christmas, right around Christmas time. All right. Number 3, what problems did the social gospel attempt to fix in America? Well, kind of the opposite of these. They wanted to fix wealth inequality. Okay. They also wanted to fix racism. They wanted to work on that. They wanted to help people stop drinking alcohol, so they also wanted to fix alcoholism. That's a whole different can of worms, but we'll get there. Okay? And they also wanted to fix, let's see, wealth inequality, racism, alcoholism. I'm drawing a blank. I've taught all day already, by the way. This is in the afternoon after school. What was I going to say? I guess it's not important. All right. Wealth inequality, racism, alcoholism. Oh, I remember what it was. Working conditions. That's the big one. I don't know how I drew such a blank on that. I'm sorry. I apologize. You can make fun of me. Email me and say, wow, what a great teacher. No, it's 4:30 and I've already taught 5 classes today. 4 classes, 3 classes, I don't know. So many classes. So many classes. I hope y'all are having a good day. So there you go. So social Darwinism, the rich believe they have no reason to help the poor. The poor are poor because they're supposed to be. I'm rich because I'm supposed to be. It leads to a lot of negative effects. Racism, inequality, and eventually Nazism. And so the social gospel comes along and they want to fix these things. They want to help fix inequality. They want to help stop racism. They want to stop people drinking alcohol. And they want to fix working conditions. They want better working conditions. Okay? Pause it if you need to. There's your answers. All right. So what actions did leaders in the social gospel help, or did they do to improve the lives of the poor? They opened settlement houses, such as Hull House. Settlement houses. Remember, that's where immigrants can go for help. Okay. They provided medical care. That's very important because, I mean, your health, if you don't have your health, you don't have anything. Provided medical care. They taught English. Okay. And they helped people find jobs. Helped find jobs. And remember, they fought for better working conditions too, but we're going to leave it at this. And then there are 2 other big movements in American history. Let me see how the glare is, and let's see how these words are looking. Oh, we're looking great. What other movements were inspired? There are 2. Women's suffrage movement, which is the women's right to vote. Suffrage sounds like a bad thing, but it's really not. It's a good thing. Okay, women's suffrage and the civil rights movement. Civil rights movement. There we have it. All right. Pause if you need to. Remember, email me with any questions. I would pause this one because this is going to be a big long one, okay? But let's rock and roll. On to the next one. So remember, the takeaway from this one is social Darwinism is very bad. The rich believe they're supposed to be rich. The poor believe they believe that the poor are supposed to be poor because there's something wrong with them. And then the social gospel is the opposite. They're wanting to help the poor. They're wanting to help immigrants. They're wanting to help African Americans. They're wanting to basically help anybody that's suffering because they believe it's the right thing to do. And they're right. The social gospel is very good, okay? All right, rock and roll, moving right along. Aha, very good. We get Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. And what we're going to do is we're going to compare and contrast their ideas. And they're very, very easy, okay? Booker T. believes in the idea of working hard and learning practical skills. W.E.B. Du Bois believes in go get a very good education at a university and then get into politics and fight for more rights. It's that simple, but let's break it down. All right, so Booker T., this is him. I like his haircut, it's kind of like mine. But Booker T., he was a former slave from Virginia who, during Reconstruction, he helps African Americans. And he's got a very specific approach of how he does it, okay? He believed that African Americans should not worry about trying to fight discrimination and segregation. He said, hey, that's the system we're living in. Let's do something that we can easily attain. Let's do something that is practical. So what he believed is that African Americans should focus on learning a skill. Okay, whether that's learning how to farm, learning to be a plumber, learning to be some type of mechanic, learning how to work on things, and then working really, really hard, saving up lots of money, and just moving yourself up in life, and that would eventually end discrimination, okay? So he didn't say, hey, let's go out right now and start a fight and end discrimination. Let's end it right now. Instead, he said, hey, go out, let's get a practical skill that we know, let's get really good at a job, let's work really hard, let's save money, and eventually racism and discrimination is just going to disappear. That's what he believed. He said, don't worry about fighting racism. Work on improving yourself first, and then we'll go fight racism if we have time after we've been working. Okay? So he believed that African Americans could eventually raise themselves up as a race during this time period to be equal to whites, is what his goal was, through hard work. So the key to Washington is, and it's very simple, okay? He believes in practical skills, so learning how to do a job, whether it's be a welder, be a mechanic, a plumber, learning some type of skill, and then working really hard, okay? Hard work. Work hard, save money, keep your nose on the grind, and just keep going, and eventually racism and discrimination will go away. That's Washington's idea, okay? It's very easy, very simple, okay? And notice what he says, and I like this quote: "Nothing ever comes to one that is worth having except as a result of hard work." That's very good. And anybody who's into like fitness or plays a sport or anything like that, as a young person, y'all get this. It's very hard work, but hey, when you win and you're successful, it makes it all worth it, okay? So Washington, very cool, very interesting guy. Washington actually founded Tuskegee University in Alabama, which was basically a school where African Americans, specifically for African Americans, they could go there and learn skills. So they're not learning, like the liberal arts and things like that. They're not learning like a traditional university. Instead, they're going there to learn technical skills. So how to be a better farmer, how to learn some type of trade, such as a welder or something like that. And then they can go out and make lots and lots of money, okay? So Washington lives until 1915. He lived to be 59. Unfortunately, he himself believed in these things, and he worked himself very hard. He traveled all over America fighting for rights for this stuff. He was pushing his agenda. He's working really hard to help out African Americans. And I believe he had a heart attack or a stroke one, or maybe an aneurysm. It was something stress related is why he died. So he worked really hard his whole life. But he is remembered for this. He is remembered as uplifting the black community by encouraging the values of hard work. So remember, when you hear Washington, remember hard work. Washington, hard work. Okay? Okay. All right. So there's Tuskegee University and the statue. There's Washington. Okay? Cool. All right. So we're going to flip to the other side. Flip to the other side. This is Dubois. And if you're fancy, you say Dubois. W-E-B, Dubois. I'm going to say Dubois. But Dubois, he wants immediate end to racism. He wants to end racism right then. He says we need to go out, we need to fight it. Immediately end racism is what I should have said. But he believes that the way to do it is get higher education. Higher education means going to college and then getting into politics and things like that. So where Washington, he's kind of practical. He believes in hard work, save money, work really hard. Du Bois is on the other side. He said, hey, this racism thing needs to end right now. And the way we can do it is to send African Americans and really all people of color. So that means any type of immigrant who's not white, and remember, I'm not being weird by saying that, I'm just trying to lay it out practically. Basically, anybody who's not white, if they want to move themselves up in life, they need to immediately fight to end racism. So go out and protest, go contact your political leaders, and then when you're moving up in life, you need to make sure you've got a college education, and you need to get into government, you need to get into leadership, and you need to fight to end racism. That's his goal. He believes it has to end right then. He doesn't think it's going to gradually go away like Washington does. Du Bois on the opposite side. He says we need to fight to end it right now, and the way we need to do this is by getting a higher education university degree. Okay? All right. So, again, he says we have to fight to end it immediately. The best way to do it is to get into a university, get a degree, and then get into politics and be a leader for your community, okay? So he's a little bit of the opposite of Washington. Washington says, hey, don't worry about racism. If you work hard, save money, eventually it'll go away. Du Bois says, no, that's not going to work. What we need to do is fight to end it right now, and the way to do it is to go to college and run for political office, and we have to be politically and socially active as African Americans. That was his belief, okay? So they're pretty much opposites, but they have the same goal, all right? So he says, either America will destroy ignorance, or ignorance will destroy the United States. It's a pretty good quote there. Very good. All right, Du Bois does something very important, and this still is around today. He founded the NAACP, which stands for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And what it does, it fights for legal and social rights for African Americans. And it's done that all throughout the 1900s and even into the 2000s, 20th and 21st centuries. He wrote a lot of books, and he fought his whole life for equal rights for African Americans. So they both had the same goal. They're both wanting to end racism and help out African Americans. They just have different approaches, okay? And you do need to remember that Du Bois founded the NAACP, okay, which fought for the rights of African Americans. All right? All righty. And there, I believe, is one of the earliest pictures of the NAACP. Not sure where Du Bois is in this one. Probably on the front row somewhere. I don't know, but there you go, NAACP headquarters. All right, so let's talk about the beliefs of Washington versus Du Bois. So Washington believes practical skills. Okay, learn practical skills. So that means learn how to be a welder, learn how to be a farmer, learn how to be a mechanic, learn how to be a plumber, learn a trade, right? Because if you can learn that, you can go anywhere and do that job. Practical skills, hard work, and these will gradually lead, eventually, an end to racism. Eventually ends racism. Okay, Du Bois is on the opposite side. Remember, he wants immediate, I'm going to put it in all caps, immediate end to racism. So this is where they're different, and this is the biggest difference. And they actually kind of fought over this their whole life, okay? So he wants an immediate end to racism, but how do we get there? Fight for rights, okay? But how do you fight for rights? You have to go to university, so you have to get an advanced degree, and then get into politics. And they both have good ideas. Neither one's idea is better than the other. They're just different, okay? So he's actually right here that politics is the way to change it because politicians, they are supposed to represent the people, but he believed African Americans need to get into politics in order to represent other African Americans, right? But the way to do that was to go to university and fight for rights, and this was the goal. He wanted racism to go away right then. Washington is kind of opposite. He wants the same thing, he wants to end racism, but he believes that the way to get there is to take the long road, okay? So he wants the short, fast road, which is hard fought. He wants the long road that is also hard fought, which is going to take a lot longer, okay? Neither one of them is wrong, they're just different, okay? So those are the differences. So now you've learned about Washington and Du Bois, all right? So you learned 4 things. You learned about social Darwinism, which is bad. You learned about the social gospel, which is good. And then you learned about these 2 guys who have the same goal, just different paths of getting there. All right? All right? Remember, pause the video if you need to. Email me if you need to. And we're going to switch gears. And we're actually going to go back in time just a little bit. And guess what? We are back at these guys. The state of Tennessee wants you to know a lot about the farmers and the railroads. But we're going to talk about how they start to get politically active with something called the Granger Movement. All right? All right, so here we go. So, as I told you in our other lesson, when farmers were starting to struggle a little bit because the railroads, remember the railroads are the only way for them to send their crops to the cities. And remember the railroads, they're the only mode of transportation. Farmers could send their stuff on a wagon, but it would take 6 months for it to get there, and by then the crops would be dead, and the farmers might even be dead, right? Because that wagon train, it was a dangerous way to go. So the railroads knew this. They said, hey, farmers, we can get your crops from your farm over to the big cities on the East Coast in 6 days, and we can make you lots of money. But guess what? Because of that, we're going to charge you some pretty high prices, okay? So farmers are struggling. They're like, hey, we're growing as many crops as we can, but we can't keep up with the railroads charging us high prices. Not only that, but farming doesn't always work out. Sometimes crops fail. And if crops fail, that's even less money. And the railroads don't care. They're saying, hey, sorry, price is the price. Gotta pay it, okay? So farmers were starting to struggle in the 1870s. So they say, hey, what can we do? So they decide that they're going to do something like this. So again, farmers in America are struggling. And notice what it says. They're starting to decline. Remember what I told you. Farming was very difficult. In the city, they could move to the city and get a factory job, and things would be not great, but better, right? Because you can show up to your factory job every day. Mother Nature doesn't always show up with rain every day, right? Okay. So farmers are struggling. Now I want you to remember this cartoon here, okay? You can see the farmers laying down, and what's about to run over them? The train. So the train is running over them with heavy prices. The farmers are struggling with debt. They're locked down on the railroad tracks. And yeah, so things are bad for farmers. So this is a cartoon about the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s in America, okay? So farmers and railroads are head to head here. All right. So they realize the need for change, and what they're going to do, they're going to decide, hey, the way we can do it is to all get together, and they start something called a Granger Movement, the Granger Movement, okay? So what it is it's farmers working for change. Granger, farmers working for change. That's all it means, okay? All right, so the main thing that they're going after is the high costs of the railroads. They're mad at the railroads. Remember, the railroads, they're the best way to get their crops to the cities on the East Coast, but the railroads are charging them high prices. So they meet in these little houses. I think I may have a picture of one. They meet in these little houses, and they're called granges. It's just a house in the middle of town. It's kind of like you might see a Mason Lodge or a Moose Lodge or something like that. It's just an organization of a group of people who are after the same thing. And they meet in these houses. They're called granges, and that's how it got the name Granger Movement. But you don't have to know that. You just need to know what they're called, the Granger Movement. They're fighting the price of the railroads. Okay, farmers getting together to fight the price of the railroads. All right, I love this. Okay, because look. The farmer's in the middle. It says, I feed you all. And look, it's got all these different professions. They're like, I do this for you. I do this for you. I do this. I do this. But remember, at the end of the day, we all got to eat. And who feeds us? The farmers do, right? So yeah, so this is very, very important. And it actually sends a really good message. The farmer is very important. And if he's being mistreated by America's #1 mode of transportation, then that's a major problem. Somebody had to look out for the farmers. Nobody was. So they looked out for themselves and started the Granger Movement. Okay. So, like I told you earlier, the Grange, that was the house where they met and how they worked on their ideas of how to fight the railroad. And they actually worked. They decided, hey, we're going to start getting involved with lawsuits and things like that. And they start to sue the railroad. They're saying, hey, railroad, you can't do this. This is like a class action thing. You're coming after us with these high prices, and it's really, really unfair. And so they start suing the railroad, and what they do is they get railroad prices regulated. If you recall, I'm going to write something on here, the Interstate Commerce Act. Remember that? Interstate Commerce Act of 1887. What that does is it gets the government involved. It doesn't actually set any rules immediately, but what it says is, hey, railroad, we're keeping an eye on you now. You got to quit acting like that. You got to quit charging these farmers too much prices, okay? And this movement gets so big that they fight the power of the railroads. They reduce their power, and we'll talk about monopolies later. And this movement gets so big, it's no longer a Granger movement. They call themselves now the Farmers Alliance, which is a very cool name. I mean, it sounds tough, right? So they're very successful, the Granger Movement. They're getting bigger. Notice they've got about 800,000 members now. That's huge, all right? America's population wasn't super big back then, but they're getting bigger and bigger, and as they got bigger, they got more power. They get the Interstate Commerce Act passed, and the railroad starts to lose power. So that's a very good thing for the farmers in America. So the Granger Movement is actually successful, okay? Here's one of their flags, one of the Farmers Alliances there. It says, the most good for the most people, wisdom, justice, and moderation, free trade. And this is from Texas, 1878. So that's pretty cool, all right? All right, so eventually this thing gets so big that other people start to pay attention, not just farmers. They're like, hey, farmers, y'all are doing pretty good, and y'all are pretty smart. Maybe we want to get involved in this thing. And they become something called the Populist Party, okay? Populist means like population, like a big group of people, and it's called the People's Party, okay? So the People's Party. And they don't necessarily say, hey, I'm a Democrat, hey, I'm a Republican. They just say, hey, we just need more rights. In general, we need to be a better democracy, and we need to fight political unfairness. Remember, they saw the government's doing weird stuff like the credit mobilier scandal. They see corruption, and they're like, hey, We need to do something. So we get this thing called the Populist Party. Now, the Populist Party comes off of these two who were fighting the railroads. The Populist Party is going to start doing their own thing, though, and they're going to have a lot of demands. Okay, so let's get to their demands. So Granger Movement and Farmers Alliance, they fight the railroads. They get so much success with this, they reduce the power of the railroads, the government starts keeping an eye on railroads, that the Populist Party is born out of this. People are like, wow, farmers, y'all are doing a good job. Maybe we should be more like y'all. And we're going to fight political unfairness, because remember, the government did have some problems, okay? So again, People's Party picnic, populist, and you can see it started Farmers Alliance, then it goes to People's Party, okay? Now, we got a very specific list of demands, and this is actually one of our answers to a question, so pay attention to this slide. Important, okay? All right, so look, what the populists wanted. They said, hey, gold is keeping our value of money too high, and we're not getting enough access to money. Let's start using silver, because they actually did use these precious metals on some of their money back then. Let's start using silver too, and we're going to get more money involved. And if there's more money involved in our economy, there'll be more money to go around for everybody. So they want gold and silver currency. Gold and silver currency, okay? We were already using gold to back up our money. They say, let's add in silver too. That'll add a little bit more money. It's not as worth as much as gold, but hey, it'll help. There will be more money involved, okay? And that's actually a good point. It may not be worth as much, but hey, if there's more to go around, it's not a bad thing. I could always do with more money, right? We all could. All right. Now, they also believed that what they wanted was a graduated income tax. So what that means is it's a level of income tax. If you're rich, you need to pay more taxes. Okay? If you're poor, you're going to want to pay less taxes. That's what graduated tax means. It's basically if you make $10, you only need to take $1 out of it. If you make $10,000, we might need to take $5,000 of that, right? Okay? So they want a graduated income tax. And what that would do, more taxes in the government coming in, that provides more benefits to poor people down here, okay? Because it's taking out more of their money. It's not a bad idea, but when you start messing with people's money, they're not happy about it. So these people get mad. And that's going to also go into that social Darwinist thing. They don't like this stuff. They don't like populism, okay? All right, now, they also want the government, let me erase here, whoops. They also want the government to take over the railroads because they believe the railroads are out of control, which in a way they really were. They're charging these high prices. They say, government, you need to take over these railroads, okay? And they also want direct election of senators. We're going to get to that later. Don't worry about that right now. But here's the big deal. More economic and political equality is what they want, okay? So they want more money in the economy. They want a graduated income tax. They want the government to own the railroad. And basically just more democracy, more equality in general. That's why they're called the People's Party. They want to help out each other. They're the populists. They're the people. We're the people. We want to help each other. That's their goal. And this is the way they believe they can do it, okay? Hope that makes sense. Please, please, please email me if you need help, okay? So the populists fight for these things. More gold and silver involved in the money. Really just the silver involved in the money. That would add more money into the economy. Graduated income tax where the poor pay less, the rich pay more. And just in general, they want, of course, the government to take over the railroads. And just in general, they want more democracy, more equality, okay? Okay. Let's see. So there you go. Blah, blah, blah. We're going to move on. All right, finally, the Populist Party gets so big that they decide, you know what? We're going to have to join one of the big parties, either the Republicans or the Democrats. They fell in line with the Democrats, okay? And this guy, William Jennings Bryant, becomes the populist candidate. He ran in the election of 1896. Okay, he was a big, important figure. He was kind of like a religious guy in America at the time. He's a big, important figure in the populist movement, and we're going to talk more about him later. But he runs for president, but guess what? He loses, and this whole thing loses a lot of steam. Wah, wah. So after 1896, the populists, they just kind of disappear. That tends to happen in America. They get a big movement that goes, it's getting a lot of steam, it's going really great. They think they're going to have change, they think it's going to work out. They run for president, and then it fails. Okay, this happens a lot in America. A famous example would have been a few years ago, the Tea Party movement, which has now changed. It's something else now. But remember, it gained a whole lot of steam, and then it just kind of fizzled out. Okay, and that happens. It happens a lot in America. All right, people get excited, they get involved in politics, but then they don't win, and then it just kind of fizzles out. All right, so what were some of the struggles of farmers in the 1870s? Well, first of all, they had debt, okay? Because it's expensive to run a farm, it's expensive to pay your land, and crops don't fetch that high of prices. And speaking of which, your crops have to be successful, and crops weren't always successful. So failing crops, meaning their crops aren't growing, maybe because of due to drought, maybe because of a flood, because farmland does tend to flood sometimes, okay? Debt, failing crops, the big one, railroads charging too high of prices. Railroads charging very high prices. The railroads knew they could do it because they're the best way to get around at the time. They're the best way to get their crops from the west to the east to the northeast. And they're like, hey, sorry, you can get on your wagon and ride for 6 months. Oh, wait, no, you can't because your crops will die. Whoops. Okay? So, this is the problem. This is the main one. And you can put a star by that one. Okay? All right. So, what were the goals or successes of the Granger movement? Well, really, they were successful at this. They did two things, and of course, it targets this right here. They regulated railroad prices. So there's going to be two of these. Regulated railroad prices. So they got the government involved. They said, hey, y'all got to do something. Y'all got to set some limits on this. Y'all got to keep the railroads honest. This is called the Interstate Commerce Act, which we already learned about. It's a big part of it. Excuse me. Interstate Commerce Act. And I know I'm in the way. I'm going to move. There we go. And because of this, if the railroad's making less money, they have less power. Okay? Reduce the power of the railroad. Very good. Reduce the power of the railroad. All right? We're doing good on this. Remember to pause if you need it. I'm going to go ahead and move on. So the farmers are fighting the railroads. It's called the Granger Movement. Okay? Granger Movement, fighting the railroads. All right? Demands of the Populist Party. We got a few here. Okay? First of all, they want more money involved. Okay? So they want to add silver in. Remember, gold is how our money has value. There's a bunch of gold sitting in Fort Knox somewhere in the treasury, and that's why our money has value. And the Populists say, hey, let's use silver too. Silver's worth something. Let's add that in. So they want gold and silver to back the currency. Backing the currency means because I have $20 in my pocket, there's $20 worth of gold somewhere. Okay, that makes our money valuable to back the currency. And they say, hey, silver's worth something, let's add some silver in that, and then we can print some more money and it'll be worth something. We won't have inflation. Okay? It's a good idea, actually. Okay? Graduated income tax. That means you pay based on your level. So you pay based on income. So if you're poor, you pay less tax. If you're rich, you pay more tax. Also not a bad idea, but hey, when you start messing with people's money, that's when things get real weird, okay? All right, they also wanted, and we're gonna write two more things, they wanted the government, I'm gonna abbreviate G-O-V''T, government, that means government, ownership of railroads. They wanted the government, they said, hey, these railroads are out of control, why don't you just take over? Government doesn't really do this. They do start to keep an eye on the railroads, but they never fully take over. Okay? And just in general, they want two things: economic equality and stronger democracy. They just say, hey man, we need more rights, we need more money, we're struggling. Okay? So those are the goals of the Populist Party. Remember, it starts with the farmers and the Grangers. It gets so big, the Granger Movement becomes the Farmers Alliance. That gets so big and becomes so successful that it morphs into this, the Populist Party. They eventually join the Democratic Party. Join the Democratic Party. But remember 1896, their candidate lost, but lost in election of 1896. And remember when the losing team, they just kind of faded away. And we're going to say, and faded away over time. So these populists, they say, hey, we fought really hard, we fought the good fight, but it just wasn't meant to be. Wah, wah. So that tends to happen though in history, it does. I'm going to grab me a sip of water. I'm not running away. So there you have it. So pause right there if you need it. And I believe we got one more topic. Cool. I know this is getting to be a long video. Please pause if you need to. Please email me. Work on the assignment while you watch. And let's knock this out. There it is. Moving on. La la la. All right. We got a big one here, but this is a cool one. We're going to talk about some cool stuff in this one, okay? So now we're going to talk about those people in cities. So those were the farmers living out in the country. Now we're going to talk about the cities and how things are going to start to change there, because life was tough in the cities for factory workers, and we're going to start something known as a labor movement. And what a labor movement is, it's just fighting for more rights of workers, okay? There's stuff they fight for, certain things. They want better wages, which is better pay, right? They want reasonable hours. They don't want to work 150 hours a week, you know. They want to fight for the 40-hour work week, and that's actually one of the things they specifically fought for was a 40-hour work week. It doesn't come until much later, I don't think until the Depression. But they want better wages, better hours. They're not trying to work all the time, and they want safer working conditions. Now, they also are going to start fighting against child labor. They say, hey, this is dangerous. They also want health benefits for workers. And they also want jobs to pay for retirement. Now, this stuff is going to come later. In the beginning, we're just going to fight for this stuff, though. Better wages, reasonable hours, better working conditions, okay? And the way you get it is called a strike. So check this out. This is a big one with the hour stuff. 8 hours labor, 8 hours recreation, and 8 hours of rest. All right, so that's one way to divide the day, okay? And it's very good. I kind of agree with that. That's how it should be. All right. So a labor unions, they get together in a certain industry and they say, hey, we need somebody to represent us, and that's the labor union, and they fight for the rights of the workers. They can also work in lawsuits. So if a certain industry is abusing their workers or not paying them enough, or maybe there's certain types of lawsuits, things like that, the labor union will fight for their rights, okay, legal rights for workers. A big famous one is called the Knights of Labor, all right? There are teachers' unions as well. But yeah, there's unions in pretty much every industry. All right, now, the best way that these labor unions figured out that they could get what they wanted was to go on strike. And what going on strike means is that they just don't show up for work. And usually they show up somewhere else, or they might show up to work, but they don't go inside work, okay? They might stand out and hold up posters and say, we want more money, we need better hours, we need better working conditions, that sort of thing. And they might stand out in the parking lot and say, hey, you can't make me go in, okay? You can't make me, because if you touch me, I'm calling the police, that sort of thing. It may even be like a walkout, so a strike. A walkout is a form of a strike where everybody is at work, but all of a sudden they say, hey, we've had enough. They get up and they walk out, they leave, and they say, hey, we're not coming back, okay? And since it's the whole group of people, and that's what it takes the whole group of people to do it. It can't just be a few people, it's got to be the whole group. The boss really can't fire everybody because it's going to be a huge process to rehire everybody, so they have to kind of meet them in the middle. They say, okay, what can we do to get y'all to come back in and get back to work? Because when they all leave, it stops production. The factory can't operate anymore. If all the teachers went on strike, the schools would shut down, that sort of thing. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon, though. So what it forces them to do, it forces the boss to meet them somewhere in the middle. They say, hey, all right, let's come to a deal. Let's figure out how can we get things how y'all need them, or at least figure out some type of deal where y'all get something and I get something in return too. Need y'all to come back to work, basically. Now, the problem is sometimes these strikes turned violent and people died, especially in the early 1900s. This was associated with anarchy. They believed, hey, if you're not going to work, you're anti-establishment, you hate America, yeah, that sort of thing. So they would go on strike and the police would show up, people would get violent, weird things would happen, and people did die in some of these strikes, okay? Really bad. All right, Some famous strikes included the Southwest Railroad strike, which was believed to be pretty much a failure, and the Great Anthracite Coal Strike. You don't have to actually remember those. Just remember what a strike is and that it was a labor union movement. It's a labor movement. So these workers, the labor movement, remember they're fighting for more rights, such as better hours, better pay, better working conditions, right? And a strike is usually how they went about it. And the strike is where people just stop working, okay? It's real easy. All right, now, there are two big ones that you need to know. Two big leaders. Eugene Debs is one of them. He has a fantastic name, Eugene Debs. And he's remembered because he was a working class guy and he worked his way up and he becomes this big leader in the IWW, which is a famous leader. The government doesn't like Debs, okay, because he's influential in this labor movement and he pushes for strikes, he pushes for things like that. But he's also a socialist. And in American history, they weren't big on socialism. And we're going to talk more about socialism later. But just remember, Debs is a very important leader in the labor movement. He's one of the big leaders in the labor movement, okay? So Debs is a leader in the labor movement. He helps out the working class, all right? And this is Debs here. He did get arrested because of some of the things he did, all the strikes and everything, okay? So there's Debs. And Gompers. Gompers is another one. Samuel Gompers, which is a really cool name too. Samuel Gompers also fought for workers' rights, so he's another leader. And one of the big things he did was he actually would deal with management. He would sit down with the boss and he'd say, hey, what can we do? How can we figure this out? And what he did, he came up with this idea called collective bargaining. And what that means is you make a bargain, you make a deal, which is collective, which means for the whole. So it's like making a deal that helps out the whole group. Collective bargaining, helping out the whole group, making a deal that helps out the whole group. So Eugene Debs and Samuel Gompers are both big labor union leaders, okay? So remember those two. Sweet, rocking and rolling. And this is Gompers here. And of course, 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for whatever we want to do, all right? You can go fishing and hang out with your girlfriend. There you go. All right, now, here's what was going on in the South. Remember, the South is always kind of doing its own thing that's a little bit worse than everywhere else in America during this time. Ugh, dang. All right, so the Southern states were struggling, and they needed to raise money quickly because, remember, the Civil War basically destroyed the South, okay? And so in order to make a lot of money very quickly, railroads and mining companies decided, you know what? Let's fire our workers. You know, our workers, they're fighting for more rights. Just get rid of them. They go on strike, who cares? Let's hire prisoners to do their jobs because we don't even have to pay them. Now, what is this a form of? This is a form of slavery, right? Okay? So this is really, really bad because it's kind of like a little bit like slavery part 2. This is not good, okay? And it's going to lead to some major problems in the South. So the South was doing something, it's called unjust use of prison labor. Unjust means it's not fair use of prison labor. And it's basically like slavery, okay? What they would do, their workers would fight for more rights, and the companies, the railroad and mining companies, they'd be like, okay, that's fine. You know, you can fight for your rights. We're just gonna hire these guys, but you know what? We didn't have to pay them, so it's even better for us. We can make a lot of money, and we don't have to pay these guys. Ooh, that's not good. That's not good. So it leads to something called the Coal Creek Labor Saga. All right, so there's a county, Anderson County, which is in East Tennessee, and there's a coal mine there, okay? And in the 1890s, the coal mining company, the Coal Creek coal mine, they said, hey, we're not making enough money. Y'all are fighting for rights. Y'all are starting to get on our nerves. These miners, you miners are getting on our nerves. You're fighting for more rights. We don't need to hear all this. We're just trying to make money. Y'all going home. You're fired. We're done. We're firing y'all. We don't need you coal miners. We're going to replace you with prison laborers. And these coal miners get mad. And they go home and they get their guns and they go to the local prison and they burned it down. All right? This is known as the Coal Creek Labor Saga. And it turned into this big fight between local police and the coal miners, and it left 25 people dead and over 500 people got arrested. So this turned into basically a tiny little civil war because of this Coal Creek coal mine. They fired their workers and they hired prison laborers, and the coal miners got really angry and they started an uprising, okay? And you see these historical signs. By the way, when you see these things on the side of the road, try to stop and read them because they're really cool. You'll learn some local history. Excuse me, but it tells you about how the coal mine, they had to actually call in the state militia in order to, a militia is like a small army. It's a volunteer army. to come after these coal miners and shut them down, okay? So 25 people got killed. Actually, I think it said over 25. Yeah, over 25 people got killed and over 500 people arrested. They eventually did drop all the charges for the coal miners because they said, hey, you know, you did what you had to do. And that's one way that workers really went to extremes to fight for their rights. So it's not bad. And it ends, what it does is it actually ends this the unjust use of prison labor. They said, hey, if this is going to keep happening, you got to stop doing this, southern states. The federal government gets involved, they're like, hey, stop, chill out, okay? No more prison labor. And it makes sense. This is really unfair to the workers who were just fighting for their rights, and the company's like, hey, forget y'all go home. We're going to hire these prisoners. And the workers are like, it ain't going to work that way. So they went and burned down the jail and killed a bunch of people. Pretty wild. History is so cool. I mean, when you really think about it. All right, so here's the deal. The government decides, hey, you know what? We got to get involved. Businesses, y'all got to chill out. We got to meet people in the middle. So they make management and government action. They start to do things to change things. So first of all, what they do is they recognize, hey, labor unions, y'all are okay. You can exist. You're doing good things. You're fighting for the rights of workers. Just quit with the violent strikes. All right, y'all can go on strike, but don't be violent. So they recognize labor unions as being legit. They also decide, hey, businesses, y'all gotta start listening to your workers. You gotta take care of your workers. And this is really good for common Americans. This is good for common people like us, because now businesses really do have to listen to us. And you see on the news, people still go on strike all the time. And it also establishes this practice of collective bargaining, okay? Which is where you find the best deal between the needs of the company and the needs of the workers. So y'all show up for this many hours and we'll pay you a little bit more, okay? Overtime, things like that. So collective bargaining, which is meeting the needs of the whole group, okay? Cool. Pause it if you need it. Take a break. But we are ready to answer questions. Okay, so let's answer these. And I think we're about done. I believe these are the end. It's been a long one, but it's been a good one. Cool stuff. What did labor unions fight for in the United States? So they fight for workers' rights. So we're going to put that in here, and we'll do a little, some sub-bullets here. Workers' rights. Okay. So this includes, some little sub-points here. So better hours, shorter hours mainly, better hours, better pay, and safer conditions. You don't want to work somewhere that's really dangerous. There's a famous story of a textile factory. Textiles are clothes. Textile factory, I want to say it was in Chicago, it may have been New York. But it caught fire, and because they didn't follow safety regulations back then, all the workers got trapped inside, and it was all women, because women were going to work by this time, and they all died. And it was a crazy number of women. I think it was like 300 or something, but it's real crazy, okay? So better hours, better pay, safer conditions. This is what labor unions fight for. Still fight for these things today. How does a labor strike work? Well, workers don't show up. Workers just stop working. They go outside and sit down. Workers don't show up. Production stops. Production stops. I need to rewrite that one. Woo! Long day, y'all. Hope y'all are having a good day. Production stops. And what does the company have to do? The company must listen to workers. That's the goal, at least. That's the goal. Okay? And then who were Debs and Gompers? They're labor union leaders, leaders in the labor movement. Leaders in the labor movement. There we go. Very easy. Leaders in the labor movement. There you have it. Sweet! Pause if you need it. We're going to rock and roll. All right. 15. Why did the Coal Creek labor saga happen? Remember the coal company, the coal mining company? They fired the workers. They said, hey, y'all going on strike, you're fighting for more rights. We don't care about y'all. We don't need you. We can hire who? Prison laborers. Ooh. So we'll put the mining company. Email. The mining company hired prison laborers, prison workers, hired prison inmates to replace the miners. And what did the miners do? And the miners began a violent uprising. An uprising means that's when they went to the jail, they burned down the jail. They said, okay, if they're taking our jobs, yeah, they don't need to be in jail all day, let's go burn it down. It's crazy. Began a violent uprising. Killed people, shot at people, the militia had to come in and shut it down. Wow. All right. And so how did the government and employers react to the rise of labor unions? Well, first of all, they had to recognize the legitimacy of labor unions. That means labor unions can exist, okay? And a big one that they came up with is the idea of collective bargaining. Collective bargaining. So that means working together to meet the needs of workers. Very good. Alrighty. And I believe that's it. Let me go check over here and see. So that way you can pause. Yep, that is it. Yep, so they got to meet their demands. They got to work with the workers, and they got to figure it out. All right, so we covered a lot. We covered social Darwinism, which is bad, social gospel, which is good. Then we went over Booker T. Washington and Dubois. Remember, Booker T. Washington believed that African Americans should learn practical skills and work really hard, and racism would eventually go away. Du Bois is the opposite. He wants an immediate end to racism. So they have that in common. They both want to end racism. But Du Bois believes that African Americans should go to college and run for political office and fight for an immediate end to racism. And then from there, we went to the Granger Movement, which all it is the farmers fighting the power of the railroads. It turned into the Populist Movement, which turned into a fight for more freedom, or more democracy, which is equal rights, and more economic equality. Okay, so they're fighting for the rights of the people. And then finally we get to the labor movement, which is fighting for better rights for workers in the cities. And the way they did it was usually by going on strike. But remember, sometimes things get weird, and companies like in the South were hiring prison workers, and that's really bad, and the workers got really, really mad, and they started a major rebellion there. But eventually we get to these things where the government and employers eventually say, hey, labor unions, we got to recognize y'all as being legit. We got to come up with collective bargaining, and we're going to work things out, okay? So we learned a lot. That was a big lesson. I know it was long, but hey, hopefully you got something out of it. Remember to pause it when you need to, take breaks, and email me if you have any questions. Guys, I hope y'all are having a wonderful, great day, and I hope everything's going well for you. Please, please, please email me if you need any help with anything at all as far as school goes, and I'll do my best to get back to you as quickly as possible. Okay, so have a great day. Talk to you later. See ya.